it's fair enough for them now to ask full commitment from the Western countries, full commitment of the US for their security. And this is, of course, what it's about at the moment. If you look last week's meetings in Washington, there were 2 successful meetings with President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer, and 1 not so successful meeting with President Zelensky. And of course, today's meeting in London should fix that, the transatlantic cooperation, and also find a way towards the peace in Ukraine. And I'm thinking that we need some kind of coalition of the willing now to think about security guarantees, possible peacekeepers. Hopefully US is there being a backstop. I wouldn't bury NATO yet, but of course, when we speak about the NATO cooperation, we have to include the participation of US as well.
Let me just play you a clip from 2 days ago. Former US Navy Admiral James Stavridis, who served as the 16th Supreme Allied Commander at NATO. This is what he had to say on Friday night after that Oval Office press conference. This is what he had to say about Trump's actions and what they herald for NATO.
I think we are headed possibly, I don't want to overstate this, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but we could be looking at the last days of NATO. And this is a gut issue about who are you going to support? A democracy that's under attack, or are you going to support a dictator in Moscow?
What do you make of what you heard there from former Admiral James Stavridis?
Well, of course, the Admiral's words were very strong, and there can be this kind of concerns as well. But I have a feeling that Washington is also waking up why Europe has so strong solidarity towards Ukraine. What are our fears? How do we analyze Russia? Finland as a neighbor of Russia, we know what is this about. And I think the message is there also in Washington. How should we cooperate between Washington and Europe on this? And NATO, of course, has many other values as well. When we look at the global situation, it's not only about the Ukraine, it's the whole transatlantic cooperation. And I think we should also value that quite high.
We also heard from Stephanie Babst as well, formerly of NATO, yesterday on the show. She mentioned something. She said, look, NATO relies very much on trust. Yes, you have the agreements, but you have to trust your allies. And at the moment, do you feel that trust is there, Pekka? Do you feel that the other NATO members can rest assured that if their territory was compromised, America would come to their rescue, that Article 5 would be honoured?
Well, of course, Article 5 either exists or do not exist. And so far, we haven't seen any statements that somebody is withdrawing from Article 5. And I think we have to build on that. But trust, of course, means also that you treat your ally in an appropriate way. And when looking at some of the statements in the Oval Office, relieving some military issues or military secrets, of course, this is not the way to go if we want to negotiate a peace in Ukraine. We have to support our ally, President Zelensky, and Ukrainians who have been fighting for their freedom, and we have to support such a peace that gives also room for the future for Ukraine.
I had a message from a listener yesterday from Poland. The message finished with her saying that she genuinely feels frightened about what the future holds. How are the Finnish people feeling about the fact that Russia, of course, has got borders with Finland, and many people seeing this withdrawal of America, this refusal to give those guarantees for Ukraine, as having a broader impact for countries that perhaps have been seen to be in Putin's path?
Well, of course, we are members of NATO, new members of NATO with Sweden. We have a defense cooperation agreement with US. So far, there has been no hiccups on implementation of the defense cooperation agreement. So we don't see any immediate threats. But of course, we have organized always our defense also ourselves. We are thinking also those situations where we were not members of NATO and how how we were ready to defend ourselves. So this is not a major change. But of course, what we see now is that NATO's European leg has to be developed. And this is, of course, a requirement also from the US side. And in addition, I think the EU, UK, Norway cooperation brings this kind of wider Europe. We are all NATO members. We have to think our security together. And I think this European leg of NATO should be developed as rapidly as possible.
Sir Keir Starmer was saying before the meeting started that he is after some solid commitments at the end of this meeting. He's not looking for statements from the European leaders that just basically said what we've heard before. There's unwavering support of Ukraine, but he wants something more solid. Some people have gone as far as to say that perhaps a no-fly zone of Ukraine would make a real difference to stopping Vladimir Putin from bringing his artillery even closer to areas that he is looking to take in Ukraine. Would you go as far as to support a no-fly zone over Ukraine?
Well, I think it's important that we as Europeans support militarily Ukraine as much as we can at this moment, economically, of course, Ukraine, so that Ukraine can negotiate from such a strong position as possible in coming talks. And we have to ally ourselves with Ukraine and support them at the negotiation table. And then comes the big issue of the security guarantees and possible peacekeepers and the backstop of the Americans and so forth. So actually now it's the question very much about the timing and how to get as strong position for Ukraine as possible in the negotiations. And first, of course, there hopefully comes a ceasefire, and then the really peace talks could begin. But there are many details, not only the borders, but particularly the security, which has to be taken up in the peace talks.
But isn't that the problem? And isn't that the problem that Volodymyr Zelensky was trying to get across in that fiery exchange in the Oval Office, that we've been here before with Vladimir Putin? There have been agreements signed, agreements that he has basically torn up when he invaded 3 years ago. Something has to be different this time round, no?
Well, I think this is correct. And when we look some of the proposals, there has been, for example, an idea that if Ukraine will not be now a NATO member, there should be this kind of fast track if, like Senator Graham proposed, if Russia attacks Ukraine again. And Ukraine has a very bad record, of course, of the peace talks with Russia when we look to the Minsk agreements, or when we look actually with the Budapest agreement to quit the nuclear weapons and so forth. Their security has not been guaranteed. And I think it's fair enough for them now to ask full commitment from the Western countries, full commitment of the US for their security. And this is, of course, what it's about at the moment.
What do you think is going to get Putin to come to the table? Already, even some of the things that we're hearing from Sir Keir Starmer this morning, this idea of boots on the ground from the UK and France, they've already been thrown out by the Russian administration as unacceptable. They said they won't accept any NATO military personnel in Ukraine. What do you think is going to make Vladimir Putin come to that negotiating table and agree a peace deal?
Well, of course, it's typical in this kind of situation that you basically say no to almost everything when the peace talks have not yet started, and you try to be from the strong position as possible. And this is definitely true with Russia. I think when Russia shows can be seen that we have such a strong united front in the West, we are together, US, Europe, other supporters of Ukraine, that they understand that this is something serious that we are now developing into support of Ukraine. I think that's of course something. And then there are countries like Turkey, actually, who were running in Istanbul the talks spring 22. These were not successful talks, but we need also those kind of mediating forces, and countries like Turkey, which is also a NATO member.